Welcome to the Wellness Abundance Podcast. I'm Melissa King, your podcast host, certified master health coach, certified personal trainer, and founder of Wellness Abundance Coaching. The purpose of this podcast is to share healthy lifestyle tips to empower you to design the abundant life you want and deserve. I'll chat with inspiring people who have built a strong foundation to build a life they love. I believe we all have the power within ourselves to create wellness abundance in all areas of our life. We simply need to find the courage within ourselves to take action. Our vision for this podcast is to help you create wellness abundance in your life with clarity, empowerment, and flexibility. Grab your favorite beverage and enjoy the episode. My guest today is my friend and health coach colleague, Cheryl Jesseritz. Cheryl is a certified master health coach and Ironman certified coach. During this episode, we talk about the benefits of working with a health coach that listens to you, understanding the difference between whole foods and processed foods, and why nutrition is super important for endurance athletes. Cheryl shares some great tips on how to improve your PR, even if you run endurance races just for fun. So sit back and enjoy this episode. Welcome back to another Wellness Abundance podcast episode. I'm so excited to have my friend and health coaching colleague, Cheryl Jesseritz, on today. Did I say your last name right, by the way?
Yeah, correct. Jesseritz.
Okay, good. Awesome. I remember when we first met, I was like, how is her last name pronounced?
I can thank my husband for that one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, husband. Anyway, so I'm super excited to have Cheryl on. Cheryl and I met through our health coaching school. We went through the same program. And so it's been a lot of fun to really kind of get to know Cheryl. And Cheryl and I are accountability buddies with our businesses. And we really share ideas with each other and encourage each other. And I feel like you, Cheryl, have been such a great support system for me the last year and a half since we met. So that's why I'm super excited to have Cheryl on the podcast. So welcome, Cheryl.
Well, thank you, Melissa. And you've been such an inspiration to me as well. So thank you for inviting me to join your podcast.
Oh, good. Awesome. Well, I'm happy that you're here. So let's start out with if you would just share a little bit about like how you were introduced to like the paleo primal world. I don't like to use the word paleo a lot, but because it could be misrepresented. But how did you find this? How did you find this community, I should say?
Well, I was thinking about that, and it's actually kind of indirectly. I'm an endurance athlete, and throughout my endurance course, I had previously been a very, very high carb diet. I was eating around 70% of my diet from carbohydrates. And then in the course of my training, I started training for an Ironman and decided that I needed to get a coach to do my programming for me because otherwise I was going to run myself into the ground. Went through that first year of Ironman training and did my first Ironman based on my high carbohydrate diet. It was fun. I survived and all that. But then I stayed with the coaching group and they recommended, as much as they can, that I lower my carbohydrates. So indirectly, now that I know in hindsight, what they were doing is they were showing me an introduction to the paleo primal diet and lifestyle, which was fantastic because it definitely improved my endurance, improved a ton when I stopped eating so many carbohydrates. And honestly, the biggest thing is my health improved. I used to get, heartburn all the time. And at the time, I didn't know why. Well, now I know it's because I was eating way too many carbohydrates and I had all that inflammation going on. Mm-hmm. So that was where I was first introduced to the primal lifestyle. Now I was always I was always into eating whole foods, but I didn't have a great understanding of what whole foods were. I was a bagel, thinking that's a whole food, which, well, maybe kind of, but not really. Mm-hmm. So over the course, where I ended up getting into the PHCI Primal Health Coach Institute was as I was looking for a school for health coaching, and it most closely aligned to with what my thoughts were regarding whole foods and eating naturally and not eating the processed foods. So that's where I landed on the school that I did. And that's where it's really blossomed into a full understanding of exactly what a processed food is and what to eat and what to avoid. And, that there are no hard and fast rules. They're just general guidelines.
Yeah. That's great. I love that you brought up like the definition of whole foods because oftentimes I think like, oh, it should like it's so obvious. It's just kind of like common sense now,
Mhm.
However, it's not really common sense in a way, and I mean this in like the most respectful way that I get how people are like they think like you thought a bagel was
Mhm.
considered a whole food,
Yeah.
because I felt like that too before I was introduced to this community and this lifestyle. I didn't really know either. Like it was an eye opener for me too. Like, oh, wait a minute, bread is not a whole food. Like
Yeah.
what?
Or the way that I grew up was basically on processed foods. No fault to my parents at all. That's just what was, I'm a child of the 80s, 80s, early 90s. So that's what was common is to eat the processed foods. It was easy to get a can of green beans or a can of corn or go and get that Wonder Bread. And then when growing up, it was like, oh, as I was getting into adulthood, blossoming from college into having my own career, I always heard about looking at the ingredients. If you can't pronounce an ingredient in the food, then you shouldn't be eating it. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I would go through it. I'd read the ingredients list. I'm like, yeah, but everybody eats this, so it's okay. Or
Yes.
I don't know what this ingredient is, but everybody else does, so it's fine. Lo and behold, that's not it at all. It really is like an orange, an apple, wheat, I mean, something very specific, corn. So
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting to go back and look at my journey into how I evolved from eating all processed foods into eating only, for the most part, only whole foods now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s as well, and my husband and I talk about that too. We ate the canned food, canned vegetables, which isn't the worst, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we always say our parents were doing the best they could with the information they were given, and I think we all are, to
Mm-hmm.
some extent. Um, so I want to talk about you as an endurance athlete. So I'm curious. So when you made that transition from eliminating processed foods, or most processed foods, I should say, to transitioning into a mostly whole food eating style, how did that change your performance with your endurance events?
Yeah, I would say it definitely improved because there's a combination of nutrition as well as the actual training that's involved. But I was a high performing age group athlete, but never at like the peak at the what we call the pointy end. I was
Hmm.
always like I would get like fourth or fifth in my age group. And then as I transitioned my diet, started feeling better. Um, as one of the side effects, of not eating 70% of my diet from carbohydrates, you lose some weight, and then you just have less to carry while you're working out, while you're running, while you're competing in these events. So I definitely saw improvements, and um, my PR right now is at 2 hours and 53 minutes at the Berlin Marathon. So that's well far above where I was at previous to that. Previous to that, I think previous to the diet change, my PR had been, I would say, 3 hours and 8 minutes. So that's a pretty significant for the marathon. So that's a pretty significant improvement.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And just for those listeners out there who are not like endurance athletes, like that, what is that? What was that? Like trying to do the quick 15 minutes,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
15-minute
Well,
difference, like
yeah, at least.
253 to 308. Yeah, at least around
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes. Like that's a
Yep.
huge, huge, huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So if you wouldn't mind just elaborating a little bit, you said on your training. So you said you made a few adjustments to your training. What changed from before you were working with your coach to while you were working with your coach?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was eating mostly carbohydrates pretty much throughout the day. I wasn't focusing on my protein. I was just focusing on getting enough carbohydrates, and then the fat and protein kind of fell where they did.
Hmm.
As I know now, protein is key. It is
Hmm.
huge to building and maintaining that muscle, let alone all the other functions in our body, because proteins are made up of amino acids, and those are a huge part of making our body just work.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to that, we do still include carbohydrates, but I work on the timing of when they're included within the diet. Specifically for endurance athletes, it's a matter of eating them just before, during, or just after. Trying to, I don't want to say carb loading because I don't really like the carb cycling, carb loading terminology.
Hmm.
Um, but you are trying to get your carbohydrates when you do get them around that workout. So that way your body is utilizing them right away. Because if our bodies aren't utilizing them, it's holding on to them and storing them, turning them into fat,
Hmm.
basically. So it's a matter. So that's one of the big changes that I made. The other thing is the protein. I've definitely increased the protein by a lot. So, and that try to have little bits of protein. I want to say little bits. I mean, it's a good chunk of protein, but throughout the day, rather than just having it all at one
Hmm.
meal. As an endurance athlete, one meal a day isn't really, it's great for somebody who's not an endurance athlete, but for somebody who is an endurance athlete, our calorie demands are quite a bit higher. So trying to space out that protein throughout the day allows our body the opportunity to use all the protein that we're putting into our body.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you brought up protein, because I feel like there's so many women I talk to that just it throughout my daily life, but not just my coaching clients, but just throughout my daily life that just don't eat a lot of protein. And it's hard for me personally to eat a lot of protein in one sitting. So I like how you kind of space it out throughout the day in a
Mhm.
way. And yeah, and I think that's really effective. And I really like how you explained how our body kind of processes carbohydrates, fat, in a very simplistic way for just the average person to understand, because I think a lot of people kind of don't really quite get that our bodies burn carbohydrates first. So as an endurance athlete, it makes sense to focus your carbohydrate intake around your workouts specifically, so your body uses that, burns it, and doesn't later on store it as fat, because that's something that I explain to a lot of people, and they just, there's a lot of uh, conventional wisdom out there with like weight loss and endurance athletes and everything that don't go into that, don't go into the details and don't explain it really properly. So thank you for explaining it in that specific way, because it's a very simple way to understand it, because I feel like it's really important.
Yeah,
So,
you're welcome. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So in regards to your workouts, how did you kind of tweak your workout routine?
Well, I would say that my workout routine, this is previous to working, on my own. I was in what we would call, what I now know is called the gray zone. It's where you're working out hard enough to where you're breathing hard, but you're not hitting the top end of where you're sprinting and you're maxing out. But you're
Hmm.
not working out easy enough where you can still have a conversation and you're in what we call the aerobic zone. You're in that middle zone. That middle zone, that gray zone, really doesn't benefit anybody from a health standpoint or from a training performance standpoint, which is hard for a lot of people to understand and to accept. Because when you first start this training method, there's a chance that you'll be run walking a lot of your training. And that's just because that's building up that aerobic base. So that way you can get to the point of where you're running in your aerobic base. Otherwise, you're going to end up in that gray zone, which, as I mentioned, is not doing us any favors. Now, occasionally, once every week and a half, something like that, introduce sprints. And, definitely working on that top end, because you do want to work on that top end because you have to have that in order to get faster. So it's working on both sides of it, just avoiding the middle part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. But I feel like, that's, I feel like a great way that I've learned how to explain it to just like my health and fitness clients is like the chronic cardio. If you're constantly in that, and I learned this from Mark Sisson, the founder of Primal Health Coach Institute, is like when you're in that gray area all the time, too often, like you said, number one, your performance doesn't improve. If it does, it's very little. It doesn't make a significant dent in achieving your fitness goals. And this is even like people who are not endurance athletes, who aren't running or competing in the organized races, just for health in general. But yeah, staying in that gray zone just really does more damage than good. So really, like you said, like getting in that aerobic zone where you could hold on, you could carry on a conversation with someone. Your heart rate's still high, you're still breathing just a little bit heavy. However, you're still able to hold a conversation with someone, and then incorporating, a sprint or a high intensity interval training workout where you're getting your heart rate just like super, super high, and really, stressing it, but just for a very short period of time.
Yeah, because honestly, if you're in that gray zone, like we were talking about, that chronic cardio zone, those sprints aren't going to feel great. They're not. You're going to be run down, you're going to be tired, you're going to go out there forcing yourself to do the sprints, let alone forcing yourself to do the chronic cardio. If you're working on that aerobic base, you're going to feel good. When you get done with your workout, you should feel good. You shouldn't be like, I need to go take a nap, I need to go crash on the couch for a couple hours. You should feel good. And then when it comes, time, or you feel like it, or you want to, get out there and do those sprints, and you're going to feel amazing. It's going to be hard, but you're going to thoroughly enjoy that and be like, I feel fantastic. I can't believe I just did that. So part of it too is what I like to teach or work with on my clients is having the confidence to go out there and run slow.
Yes. When
you're in a race, that's where you're racing hard, and that's where you're pushing your limits. But in training, a lot of our runs are going to be slow, and you need to have the confidence to where if you're running around the block, you see your neighbor's in front of you. Our inkling as racers and competitors are, I'm going to go catch them, and I'm going to go either run with them or go in front of them. Well, no. Let's just hang back and just know your level. Know that this is where I'm at. I'm confident. When we get to the race, if I ever get the opportunity to race that person, I'm going to take it to them. That's my opportunity to show where I'm at. But having that confidence to know that this training is working, and trusting the training, and knowing that running slow is where you need to be.
Yes. I'm so happy you brought this up. So when I was introduced to Mark Sisson, the founder of Primal Health Coach Institute, I was training for my first half marathon, and my husband, we had just started dating at the time, introduced me to this lifestyle. And I had mentioned to him that I was training for my first half marathon, and he helped me get my diet dialed in and focusing on whole foods. And in regards to the training, he suggested don't do some hardcore distance running. Just do exactly what you just said, like the low level cardio, and do walk runs, and throw in some high intensity interval training. And we did some sprint workouts, on a sand dune hill, which is really hard. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so hard. I don't know if I could do this. But then I was so skeptical in the beginning. I was like, but that's not what my Runner's World magazine tells me to do. And I was so skeptical about it. But I was like, all right, I'm just going to try this because the best that can happen is I gain a lot of benefits from it. And the worst that can happen is I'm not going to gain any benefits from it. And then I just go back. So I ended up running my first half marathon in a fasted state. So no food, just black coffee and water in the morning. And I felt great. Like I did feel about mile 9, I was feeling some muscle fatigue. Um, but by the time I got to like mile 10, I only had 3 more miles to go. I really got that, like the second wind, and just really crossed the finish line strong, like sprinted across the finish line. And after doing that, that's how I finished all the races I had done after that. But it just was such an eye opener to me. Like, wow, like this workout routine is extremely effective. And I will never go back to the old way. Never
Mhm.
ever go back.
Yeah, and I love what you say because the old way, it really does just run you into the ground.
Mhm.
You don't feel good during the training, you don't feel good during the race. And who wants to go through life not feeling good? You know, but
Yeah.
it is a huge mindset shift, similar to how we talked about processed foods. And it's a big learning curve as
Hmm.
you know, traditional knowledge is to eat a high carbohydrate diet for endurance events.
Hmm.
So it's a mindset shift to say, okay, I got to trust the process. Let's see what happens. And like you said, Melissa, what I love that you said is the best that happens is you improve. The worst that happens is you don't.
Hmm.
And then you can always make adjustments after that
Right.
because that's what life is about, is going through it and making little tweaks here and there to see what you can do to what fits your body and your lifestyle. Because again, we are all individuals. So your training plan isn't going to be exactly the same as mine, but they'll be, the big picture is they'll be very similar.
Hmm.
But it's those individual little tweaks that make us all unique and why we aren't all running the exact same pace in a marathon or the
Right.
exact same pace in a 5K
Hmm.
or in a triathlon, any event, or why we don't all lift the same amount.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's all an individual basis, and we don't have to dive deep into this now. Maybe on another episode we could talk more in detail about this. But also for women, it depends on where you're at in your cycle too.
Mm-hmm.
That your hormones are a huge variable in your performance, regardless of how low carb you eat, or how hard you train. Sometimes that's kind of irrelevant when it comes to where you're at in your cycle during your race. So um
Yeah, I would say, for most women, having your menstrual cycle should not prevent you at all from racing. A lot of women, that's when they perform their best. Seems counterintuitive because you could be potentially dealing with like cramping or other PMS symptoms. But most of the time, that's when women perform their best. But also when you're in your training, it's a matter of acknowledging where you're at. So, like for instance, when you have your sprint workouts, that may come into play as to where you're at in your cycle. If you're not feeling it that week because of where you're at in your cycle, don't do them.
mhm.
Wait until the following week because you're going to be feeling better that next week. And then you're going to be just enjoying it and loving those sprints.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you just mentioned, there's another thing I want to kind of reiterate as well after I reiterate this point that you brought up a few minutes ago that I think is bears repeating. But I love how you just said, like, if you're not into it, like, and not into sprinting, it's okay to postpone it till the following week. I feel like we get too caught up in, this is my training schedule. I have to stick to it in order for me to be successful. And the reality is that can actually inhibit your your performance and your improvement if you're not really paying attention to your body. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And
Yeah, I
the
would
other,
agree with that for sure. And definitely,
yeah.
if you're working If you're doing it on your own, you need to be able to listen to your body, which can sometimes be hard because we're in our own heads a lot.
Right.
If you have a coach, your coach, in my personal opinion, you need to have a good coach. And part of being a good coach is being able to modify the training cycle mid-cycle. If you've got somebody who's, you've wrote out their schedule for a week, and then you got a female, and she is like, no, I'm not feeling it this week. The coach has got to be willing and able to take that sprint workout off, readjust the schedule, and put something else out there and move things around. So you got to have a coach who's willing to listen to you, and you have to be able to be open to discussing with your coach and letting your coach know where you're at. Because if you're not open and honest, your coach isn't going to know, and they can't make those adjustments.
Right. Yes, definitely. I know. Whenever I'm training any of my clients, specifically women, men too, but specifically women, every single session I start with, how do you feel today? Like, how are you feeling right now in this moment? What are your energy levels? What are your stress levels? Like, how are you feeling overall? And if they're like, I'm feeling kind of low energy and have very high anxiety, then I'm going to make adjustments to the workout depending on what the workout is. Yeah, a really good coach will have a backup plan and then a backup plan for that backup plan.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
That's what we do as coaches. That's our role. We're the experts, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So the other thing I want to emphasize is that you mentioned a few minutes ago is that you should feel energetic after a workout. You shouldn't finish a workout and then be like, oh my God, now I just want to pass out and go to sleep and sleep for 10 hours. They should give you energy. Your workout should give you energy.
Yep, exactly. If they're not, there's one or two things. Either you're going too hard, or basically you're going too hard. You're going in that chronic cardio zone, or you're going too long, because there is something to be said for, yes, you may be training for an endurance event, but if you're training for your very first marathon, you're not going to go out and run 20 miles tomorrow if you've been, only running 2 to 3 miles.
Right.
You have to acknowledge your limits and know where you're at. Otherwise, you will get injured in addition to feeling terrible. And injuries can just make you feel even more terrible.
Yes, definitely. So I also feel like, we have some friends who are like this, where they're just like, oh, I need to just sweat a lot. I just feel so tired after workout to make sure I get a good workout in. And the reality is, I won't get into the sweating right now because we all sweat differently. But it's just, you have to really just get that out of your mind. Like, just because you're not totally exhausted after a workout doesn't mean it's not effective.
Exactly. And I know a lot of people that I work with, a lot of friends, family also, they tell me that they don't like lifting and strength work because they don't feel like they get a sweat. So they don't feel like they got in a good workout. And I will tell you, as an endurance athlete, I enjoy endurance athletes. I enjoy the events, which is why I do them. However, strength training is way better for you. You're going to get way more out of that. You're actually going to probably end up burning more calories. You're going to be building more muscle. And as an endurance athlete, I myself do include strength training. And with my clients, I like to incorporate strength training as well. So I think it's so important. So I don't want to neglect to mention that part as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been saying this for the past decade, like a really well-rounded fitness routine includes like some dynamic movement, dynamic warm-ups, a strength training routine 3 or 4 days a week, depending on what your goals are and what your schedule's like. Some longer workouts, some high intensity workouts such as sprinting or burpees or whatever, and then also mobility and recovery, mobility/recovery, because that's the key that's really a well-rounded workout routine, because recovery is just as important, if not more than, the strength training. And
yeah, I would agree. I'm glad that you mentioned mobility, because if you hadn't said it, that's what I was going to pop in with. Because mobility is hugely important. I almost put mobility can be a form of recovery, but I almost want to separate the two of them because
Mm-hmm.
recovery needs to be true recovery. It needs to be something where you can do, if you're normally running, you can do a walk. That can be a recovery. Some sort of, I like active recovery,
Mm-hmm.
or an easy spin on the bike, or, an easy swim in the pool. Something where it's just low key, where you're moving your body, but it's no stress. Like you could do
Mm-hmm.
this in your sleep almost. I mean, don't do it in the pool because we don't want people
Yeah.
drowning.
Yeah. No, we don't want that.
Yeah. But mobility is huge for another reason. I mean, that's also can be a form of recovery. However, sometimes that needs to be a little bit more focused on where your
Mm-hmm.
tight areas are. So sometimes it may or may not feel good in the moment when you are doing
Mm-hmm.
the mobility work. I will say, I think Kelly Starrett's one I heard this from. If it feels sketchy, it is sketchy. So if it hurts in a bad way, don't do it. But you need to get used to your body, get to know your body as to what type of, I don't want to say pain or hurt or discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Discomfort is probably a
Yeah.
better word.
Mm-hmm.
Discomfort you can tolerate and makes sense to get those muscles to loosen up. I'm a big proponent of foam rolling.
Mm-hmm.
That has worked well for me. And there's a more dynamic stretching. Static stretching can have its place, but I think the dynamic stretching works a lot better to get the mobility and with the injury prevention being the main goal.
Yes, yes, definitely. I know yeah, it's fascinating if you belong to a gym or if you've ever gone to a gym before. It's so interesting to me. And I do this from a non-judgmental zone, but just watching, observing gym goers. They're very much into the static stretching before a workout. And um there's so much more knowledge out there, so much more education out there, on the thanks to the internet. That could be a really good thing. That I do notice more people not doing as much static stretching in the gym and more dynamic stretching, definitely foam rolling. And yeah, I'm a big proponent of that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's within the athletic population. I think it's
Hmm.
more common knowledge now because when we were kids, being on the sports teams, we'd get out there, we'd all be doing our static stretching, touching our hamstring, touching our toes to stretch our hamstrings for 15, 20 seconds. And actually, it's been shown that that does more
Right.
damage. You are more likely to get injured by doing that. Within the athletic population, I think that we typically know that it's somebody who's just getting back into it or getting into the gym or hasn't done anything since middle school. And so they're still going off of what they were taught back then versus the new knowledge and the new science that is coming out.
Yeah.
And that's another thing too, is there's always new information coming out. So it's trying to keep abreast of what the best practices are and keeping up and learning on all of those things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because it changes so fast. We're constantly learning new things about the body. And that's one reason I love being in the health and fitness space is I'm so fascinated with the body and how it works, how it operates, the systems within it. And I feel like that's also a good, because it could be overwhelming at times, like, oh my gosh, now there's another new study that came out. I feel like it's on a weekly basis, so we're constantly hearing about new studies out that help XYZ, you know excuse me, XYZ health issue. Excuse me. But that's where I feel like, especially if you're an endurance athlete, like working with a coach, a highly qualified coach like yourself, can be really beneficial. Because one thing that I tell my clients is, I think, I always encourage my clients to do their own research on, and figure out what works best for them. However, if they don't want to do all the research, like that's what I'm here for. I geek out on that stuff. I love reading that stuff. I actually had, a client like the beginning of this year say to me, okay, like I want to work with you because I know you're always up to date on, the new studies and what's best for me from a health perspective. So Yeah, that's one reason it's very beneficial to work with a coach.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's one of the things that we do offer as a coach is we, I know for myself, just like you, Melissa, I like to geek out on that stuff. I listen to podcasts all the time. I drive my kids back and forth to school. I've always got the podcast on, or doing my mobility work. I'm listening to the podcast, or I'm on a
Yeah.
bike in the basement listening to the podcast. I love listening to all that information. I know for a lot of people, either you don't have the time or it's just not something that you're interested in listening to the entire podcast, get the 10 seconds of information that you need.
Yep.
So that's where we can come into play. And as a coach, our job is to work with you so that we can determine what's going to work best for you. So you can come to us and tell us, I've got this issue going on. This is a problem that I'm trying to work on. We'll ask you some questions, try to dig down, get more information about it. And then if we have some knowledge that we might be able to share with you, we'll ask you if you're interested in that knowledge. And if so, then we'll share that with you. And then that will at least give you a jumping board as to, oh, I could go check into this and look more into this. Does this actually fit me? Is this something I want to try to incorporate into my life? And then as coaches, from the health coaching standpoint, we can most certainly work with you to figure out ways to incorporate the changes that you want to make into your life. So it's not something that's being forced. Anytime you make changes, it's hard. It's hard
Yes. Oh
to
my gosh. Yes.
stick. So it's one of those things that, Melissa and I both love doing this, working with clients to figure out how are we going to make these little tweaks to your lifestyle so it fits your lifestyle, so that it's not something that you say you're going to do and you do it for 3 days and then you're just like, this is too much and I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. Totally agree. 100%. So I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. I love talking about the endurance, and because I haven't done an endurance event in years. It's been a while, but I love chatting with you about it because you are the expert and you do them regularly. But I'm curious, like, what's your favorite part about being an endurance athlete?
Honestly, I like the community.
Mm,
I enjoy, I have a Saturday morning group that I quote unquote run with. I go to there. I usually run, not always, but sometimes I'll run by myself most of the time. Sometimes I'll run with the group, but I love going there beforehand and talking with all the people, meeting the people, seeing what's going on in their lives. They're so nice, so friendly. And then they're also part of a Facebook group, so get involved in that. The other thing is just going to the races where I don't know anybody. I love going to the races. I love having those conversations, meeting new people. I love learning. So I love talking to people, and I learn something from each and every person that I talk to, right? Each and every person that I meet. And it's just, yeah, I think the community is the biggest thing that I love about the endurance world.
Yeah, that's great. And that's all part of like the primal lifestyle too. Mark Sisson
Mhm.
talks a lot about that. By the way, a little plug, if you haven't read Primal Connection by Mark Sisson and you're interested in more of like the community social aspect of like the primal lifestyle and why it's important to have your tribe, read that book or listen to it on the audio version because it really is a really great reminder of how important it is to have that community that you feel safe in and that you can learn from others and just have that support system there
Well, that
for you.
sounds fantastic. I've read a lot of his books, but I have not read that one.
Oh,
So
you haven't read Primal Endurance? I mean,
no,
Primal Connection?
I've read Primal Endurance, but not Primal
Yeah,
Connection.
Primal
I'll add
Connection. Yeah.
that one to my list.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually Scott's favorite of all of Mark's books is Primal Connection. So
Okay.
it's really good. It's really good. So awesome, cool. Well, where can people find you if they want to connect with you, possibly work with you?
Yeah, my website is www.mnhealthandwellness.com.
Awesome. And who?
Probably the best place, and I am also
Okay.
on Facebook. However, my Facebook page isn't updated as often as I would like. So the
Okay.
best this is probably the website, to be honest with you.
Okay, awesome. And who would who's who's your ideal client?
Yeah, an ideal client would be any endurance athlete looking to take their performance to the next level. I'd love to work with you both on the nutrition aspect of it, because I do believe that that is an forgotten or underappreciated aspect
Mm,
of it, because I think that that is huge and probably one of the most important aspects of endurance training. Because if you're going to live this lifestyle and do it in a healthy way, nutrition is key, along with some of the other lifestyle factors, such as the sleep and things like that. But also I can certainly work on programming and get you set up with your workouts and be flexible, as we talked about with the women. If you're not
mhm.
feeling it that week, we're going to adjust your schedule.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. I love that. So, just a little plug. So, Cheryl is a certified master health coach and an Ironman certified. Are you a coach? Is that like the
Yeah.
correct
Yep.
term? Iron certified
Yep.
coach. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So if you are wanting to, like Cheryl mentioned, like take your performance to the next level or even possibly get into the endurance world, Cheryl is definitely the coach for you. So, awesome. Cool. I have one more question for you before we sign off. What do you think of when you hear wellness abundance?
I think of Melissa.
Ah, that's so nice. You're making me blush.
Well, yeah. No, I think of Melissa because Melissa has a wellness abundance and she is a fantastic coach. And I have had, like she mentioned, we work together and we bounce ideas off of each other. We're accountability partners, and she is so fantastic. So I'll give a little plug to Melissa. If you need a health coach, Melissa's your lady.
Ah, thank you, Cheryl. That's so sweet. Ah, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Cheryl, for coming on the podcast. I'm so happy we had a chance to talk about this. And yeah, anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think that's it. And I'm hoping to work with some of you. That'd be great.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. The Wellness Abundance podcast is sponsored by Wellness Abundance Coaching. At Wellness Abundance Coaching, we help women lose weight effortlessly and minimize anxiety with clarity, empowerment, and flexibility. We offer one-on-one and group health coaching, corporate wellness programs, and on-demand fitness videos. To learn more about how we can help you become the healthiest version of yourself and to schedule a time to chat with us, visit melissaking.net.